Good morning. In any case, welcome to SAIS. I'm David Lampton. I had China Studies here and I'm the Dean of the Faculty. I think the next 80 minutes I hope you'll find exciting and interesting and help you make the decision that all of you confront. So in any case, welcome. I want to introduce in a moment my colleagues. I'll start by introducing myself. As I said, I had China Studies. I started my career at Ohio State University, which in the fall of each year is America's biggest single university, and my initial classes were 350 students, and let me say, SAIS is different than that, and I love the difference. I then went to New York for 10 years and headed an exchange organization, an NGO, and raised money and tried to deal with personnel problems and keep abreast of my field. And then I got the wonderful opportunity to come to SAIS and teach graduate students who were all interested in what I'm interested in. So in any case, that's my brief thumbnail biography. I want to say something about SAIS. I hope today you'll discern a number of things that'll help you make your choice. But the thing I want to emphasize is SAIS is a unique place. And I think it's unique in a number of ways, but probably one very important respect. And that is that all of us have a sense of shared purpose, which isn't the norm in higher education. I want to just explain a little how we might, or at least how I might define that shared purpose and how we came to hold it. Of course, SAIS was founded in the mid-1940s, and it was founded by a couple of people that were motivated by an idea. Christian Herter, who was at one point Secretary of State, and Paul Nitzet held a variety of jobs throughout his long career, and for which the school is named. Most importantly, associated with NSC 68, a document that laid out the strategy for the Cold War. But the point is, these two were strategic thinkers. And that meant they had a point of view, and they tried to structure their activities around that point of view. And their point of view was that World War II led to a fundamental change in the world's power structure. England had fallen, not to say on hard times doesn't quite capture it. Europe wasn't playing the role, the European powers that they had. The United States was thrust into a role of leadership for which we were frankly not entirely prepared. And they were sitting around their breakfast table, literally, and said, what do we need to do to generate a generation, and not only one generation, but a succession of generations that can help lead the then free world? And they asked themselves, what do you need to do? The British had a very systematic sense of how you train leadership. They had a global empire, but we didn't. And they answered that question by saying, well, we need people who, first of all, have some theory about how the world works, organizing principles, but we also need people who understand economics. We need people who understand history, culture, and language. And Dean Harrington just mentioned 16 languages. I don't know if it's 16 or 17, but we teach them all through the proficiency level. If you think for a school of 650 people, 17 languages through the proficiency level is one heck of a commitment. And that goes right back to our founding. And then additionally, they thought you need to understand the functional issues that confront us around the world. We would say now environment, science and technology issues, public health issues, those kinds of things. But the point is, they had a point of view. We got to teach economics, we got to teach history and culture, we got to teach language, we got to teach theory, we got to teach functional issues. And that's how our curriculum is organized. And economics is not quite a third of the curriculum. And I think that is sort of emblematic of the difference I'm trying to describe. So, this will be appropriate for a lot of people. A lot of other people may find something else more congenial, but this is a place that wants to turn out leadership and believes it knows what it takes to do that. And I was struck by what Dean Einhorn said, is you're all going to have more than one career. you're not preparing for one career. You're preparing for, I've had two, and that's on the low end of careers. So in any case, I hope you'll come away with a sense of how this place is different and judge whether that difference is right for all of you. Now, what I'd like to do is introduce my 6 colleagues that'll each share briefly in hopefully 5 minutes. And I would ask you, if they exceed 6 minutes, start wiggling in your seats. Be generally a little, encouraging to wind it up. And that'll help me keep my colleagues on track here. To my immediate right, and I'll go from your right down the line, and that's the order in which people will speak. We have Professor Elliot Cohen. He's Director of Strategic Studies here at SAIS and the head of the Philip Merrill Center for Strategic Studies. Elliot came to SAIS in 1990 after serving on the faculty at Harvard and the Naval War College and helping to stand up the policy planning staff at the Department of Defense. He has been a member of a number of advisory committees, including the Defense Policy Board of the Department of Defense. He's been a member of the official advisory committees, including he ran the Air Force's official study of the Gulf War. From 2007 to 2009, he served as counselor at the Department of State. He's published many works that include Supreme Commander, Soldier, Statesman, and Leadership in Wartime, which received the prestigious Huntington Prize. His latest book, which will come out presumably this fall, is called America's Warpath. He's won the Excellence in Teaching Award twice here at SAIS. To his right is Professor Gordon Bodner, our distinguished professor of international finance and director of the International Economics Program. Professor Bodner came to us in 1999 from the Wharton School, where I should add he was awarded the Outstanding Teaching Award 3 consecutive years. He's taught not only at Wharton, but at the University of Rochester, Princeton, and the University of Frankfurt. He's been a research fellow at the National Bureau of Economic Research, a visiting scholar at the IMF, and a consultant to financial firms and financial institutions. He is currently associate editor of several journals in international economics and finance and is a research associate at the Weiss Center for International Finance at Wharton. He also won the Excellence in Teaching Award here as well. Eric Jones, to his right, is based at the Bologna Center of SAIS, and Professor Jones heads the European Studies program there. A product of SAIS himself, he focuses on the issues of economics, elections, and foreign policy, the European Union, and transatlantic relations. I should also add that he teaches economics as well. Professor Jones is a member of the editorial boards of the Journal of European Public Policy, the journal Government and Opposition, and the journal International Spectator. He's written widely on issues of European integration and has won prizes for excellence in teaching at both the University of Nottingham and the Central European University. To his right is Dorothy Sobel, and she is Senior Adjunct Professor of International Economics and Emerging Markets and Coordinator of the Emerging Markets Specialization here at SAIS. Professor Sobel spent most of her career in the Federal Reserve of New York, where until her retirement in June 2006, she was Vice President of Research. She served as the editor of Current Issues in Economics and Finance and was former Senior Fellow in Economics at the Council on Foreign Relations. She began teaching here at SAIS in 1998 and has written widely on issues related to international finance markets. She has twice won the Excellence in Teaching Award here at SAIS. To her right is Dr. Kenneth Keller, and he's director of the Bologna Center and professor of international policy. He has held this position since 2006. Among his many credentials, he is former president of the University of Minnesota, senior fellow for science and technology, and senior vice president of programs at the Council on Foreign Relations, a member of the National Academy of Engineering, and a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. He served as director and vice president of the American International Institute of Medical and Biological Engineering, and was director and chair of the Medical Technology Leadership Forum. He's written widely, and his interests range from American foreign policy to biotechnology and information technology to education, environment, and health issues. He received the Distinguished Alumnus Award from Johns Hopkins. And last but not least is Cinnamon Dornsife. Currently, she's acting director of our International Development Program and has taught at SAIS since 2003. Her more than 30-year career in international development includes representing the United States with the rank of ambassador on the board of directors of the Asian Development Bank. Before this, she worked with the Asia Foundation for many years and was Washington representative, was also the Southeast Asia program director and assistant representative in Indonesia. She has also worked at the World Bank, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and the U.S.-Asia Environmental Partnership, and serves on the boards of numerous nonprofit organizations. Professor Dornsife consults in the fields of development policy, aid effectiveness, strategic philanthropy, international financial policy, and sustainable economic development. So with those brief remarks, I'll ask Professor Cohen to lead us off, and we'll just go down the line.
Okay, thank you. Welcome to SAIS. I was told to explain what it is that I like about SAIS, and I think what I'll do is tackle that by giving you a week in the life of a SAIS professor. So this Monday, I was mainly editing this book I've got coming out, which starts with the burning of Schenectady in 1690 and ends with the Confederate raid into Vermont in 1864, with detours along the way into the 7 Years' War, the Revolution, and the War of 1812. That's a history book. I'm a political scientist. It would be a book that would be hard to write at any other place. One of the great things about this institution, it does not respect disciplinary boundaries, and neither do I. Tuesday morning, teach my research seminar bright and early. The session for about 2.5 hours was whether Kissinger's beliefs about the history of international relations had any bearing whatsoever on what he did as National Security Advisor. So it was about the intersection, or possible intersection, between theory and practice. Of course, the students are all hard at work on papers like how does al-Qaeda's strategy affect its tactics. I had lunch with a former student who's now the Iran director on the National Security Council staff, and we got a little gossip there. We reminisced about her time as my chief of staff when I was counselor at the Department of State, and we visited Peshawar when we were briefed by another former student who was running development programs into the federally administered tribal areas there. And in the afternoon, meeting with students, including interviewing 2 students who want to run our annual one of the annual activities that Strategic Studies does, a week-long staff ride, as it's called, to Europe. This past year we did Wellington's campaigns against Napoleon's marshals. So we spent a week in northern Spain. Next year I think we're going to start at Dunkirk and march on London, which thankfully Hitler never did. Wednesday, of course, today, I'm on a panel chaired by my colleague, Professor Lampton, who you wouldn't know it, but is actually on sabbatical leave. He doesn't have to be here. It says something about this school that somebody who's on sabbatical will show up here and with a smile on his face for this kind of activity. And it says something about the loyalty of the place that I think the faculty feel to it. This afternoon I'll be unavailable because I'm testifying to the House Foreign Affairs Committee on the Middle East. I probably won't be easy, but I won't have as bad a time as Admiral Mullen, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, described to SAIS students 2 weeks ago after his testimony on Capitol Hill. That was in a big lecture that he gave here. Tomorrow, another class, first thing in the morning, talking about, this is called The Art of Strategic Decision. We're going to be talking about how to get out of a war. The case is the Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan, all kinds of contemporary echoes and implications. And Friday, I get on a C-130 with 25 students, and we fly to Yuma, Arizona, where we're going to spend the weekend at the Marine Corps' Air Weapons Tactical School, flying around in helicopters and watching them bomb things. In the company of the commander of the 2nd Marine Air Wing, Major General John Davis, of course, another former student. I probably should have begun the week with last Sunday when I was talking to my friend and colleague, John McLaughlin, about the Cape Cod Magic Conclave. Now, Mr. McLaughlin is our distinguished practitioner in residence. He is the former deputy director and indeed acting director of the Central Intelligence Agency. But just as important from both my point of view and his, he is, and I am not making this up, a member of the Order of Merlin. And he teaches one of those career courses that we're talking about, which is entitled Defense Against the Dark Arts. And I'm happy to talk more about that. So what does all this add up to? I think it adds up to 4 things. First, this is a place that is academically serious. Academically serious and deep. I think one of the great things about SAIS is we are obviously concerned with policy, but we feel free to go into all kinds of other directions, historically, theoretically, and I think that's all to the good. Secondly, we are policy relevant. We're policy relevant in many of the courses we teach, in many of the activities that the faculty engage in, and certainly where a lot of our students are headed. Thirdly, it's a pretty adventurous place. We recruit adventurous students. You're a pretty adventurous lot, and there's more adventures when you get here, whether it's travel, all kinds of interesting opportunities and the like. And finally, and perhaps really most important from my point of view, we have students who have done, and more importantly, will do amazing things. When I was counselor of the Department of State, I traveled all over the world, often to very nasty places. And the thing that was truly wonderful was everywhere I went, I saw former students, some often students of mine, but not always, in all kinds of capacities, in the United States government, in foreign governments, in the United Nations, in non-governmental organizations. And as we like to say in strategic studies, they're students who know that they've walked away with a lifetime warranty. And one of the great joys of being at this place is the phone is always ringing, the email is always humming with former students, sometimes just to let you know what they're up to. Sometimes to ask for advice, but often just to let you know what they're up to. And it makes it a great place to teach.
Gordon.
Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to SAIS. I regret to say economists' lives are not as interesting as strategic studies professors, but we like it that way, I think. I wanted to talk about the issue, why are there economists at SAIS? It's been brought up. It's one of those things that, what the heck are a bunch of academic economists doing at an international affairs school? Why would someone leave a place like Wharton to come to a international affairs school? And I think I want to give you a bit of my take on why I think that was probably the best decision in my career. International affairs is a multidimensional field. Nobody's going to deny it. This school was structured in such a way that it's like a 3-legged stool. It has international relations training, it has language training, and it has economics training. And I think if you think seriously about the major international issues out there that you're likely to encounter in your careers going forward, it's going to be pretty hard to avoid things that involve economic issues. I dare say that the main issue going to be wrestling this country for the next 2 years is simply about adding up columns of numbers and trying to get them to balance, which is the basics of economics, taxation, and spending. And that's an unavoidable phenomenon for everybody. So whether or not you're sitting there saying, well, what I want to do in international affairs doesn't really need economics, think about it more broadly. Your life needs economics. So one of the things when you look, I'm sure most of you have gotten into more than one international affairs school or looking at other choices. One of the things that makes SAIS different when you look at it side by side with its competitors is we do economics seriously. It isn't just sort of a course on globalization and a course on financial markets and you're done. We look at this as a field in which you need to really understand what's going on, and so we have a series of courses that get you the fundamental concepts in economics, both at the basic level, at the international level, and then at the applied level. While some of it is a little bit like basic language courses in the sense that, you got to learn grammar and you got to learn structure, ultimately the purpose is to be able to use it, and we work in getting the economics training you have to a level where you can see how it gets applied in terms of policy issues and applications. So while there's a little bit of academic stuff, we're not an classic academic economics program. First of all, it's almost all internationally oriented, which is a very unique feature. And we have programs not just in the basic international economics, but in international finance and international development, in a wide set of applications for economic policy. It'll be impossible for you to find something you don't find interesting in economics. My program alone has 35 or 36 courses, depending on the particular year. As Professor Lampton said, I've been here 11 years. I came from a business school environment. Some of you may be looking at business schools. This is a situation, at a business school, at Wharton, I watched business schools try to integrate international concepts into their curriculum. They've been trying to do it for 20 years, ever since I started teaching. To be quite honest, they have not been very successful. You go to any of the top business schools, it's still largely a domestically oriented business program with a few bells and whistles added along the side. And what I found, even at Wharton, where they have the Lauder program, which is one of the more heroic attempts to try to mix these, it wasn't working very well. And that it was actually much easier to take a program in 1999 where there really wasn't much finance or private sector economics, business school type context, and bring down a few faculty members, myself being one, and bring that material into the curriculum of an international affairs school. I can teach you all the finance you need to know to work as a professional at any level in the finance in 4 courses. It's not that hard. What you need to know is how all the other stuff, the business schools or other schools that try to mix that in with what they do, will not do nearly as well as we do. What we can do is the foundation is here, the economics is here. If you want the applied areas of economics, that comes naturally out of understanding the basics, and you will have that combination of a practical education, practical skill set for your career, plus the underlying foundations of international relations. And together, in my opinion, it has worked much more effectively to create the right kind of student, the right kind of graduate for the next generations. Now, I'll be back later this morning to talk to you about the gory details of the economics requirements, so I'm not going to get into that now, but I just want to take the opportunity. Look around you. This is a lovely place. As they say in real estate, location, 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 we have it. This is the place. We're in the center of everything that is international in Washington, D.C. And ultimately, that gives you the greatest opportunities while you're here. So I want to just encourage you all to think very seriously about this. If you're a little nervous about the economics, I know those of you who are interested in economics, this is the place to be, hands down. If you're a little nervous about the economics, I'll talk about it more right before lunch. And you're happy, I'll take all the questions you want. So I seriously encourage you all to consider this place. It's the best possible place, in my opinion.
Thank you. Eric.
It's always hard to follow my colleagues because they not only say such interesting things, but they say all the interesting things, and I feel like I don't have very much to add. What I'd like to do is talk to you about three different things, and I'm going to follow Professor Bodner in starting off with how we do what we do at SAIS. And so I'll move from how we do what we do to what it is we actually do, and then I'll finish up with who actually does it, right? I figure that gives me something to cover. What I want to emphasize is that, we're one of those really weird places where we actually believe in interdisciplinary work. When Professor Cohen says we don't respect disciplinary boundaries, he doesn't mean that in a disrespectful way. What he means that is as an intellectual challenge, we're very much engaged in what's called problem-centered research. We start with a real problem, and then we use whatever tools we have to, and we'll learn new tools if necessary, in order to address that problem. And it's usually a problem in the real world, which is why we get that policy relevance as well. Now, many of the tools that we use, we borrow from economics. And when Professor Bodner says we teach economics and take economics seriously, what you should understand is that the economics doesn't stop in the economics classes. The economics extends across the curriculum. I'll be lecturing tomorrow to my students in Bologna using the clever video conferencing equipment that we have here about the political economy of Britain and Germany in the 1990s and 2000s. And you really can't do that unless the people have the basic economic background to understand the policy choices that had to be made or maybe didn't have to be made in both of those countries over that period. So this interdisciplinarity, I think, is critical, and the problem-centered nature of our research is critical. And I keep using this word research, and that's because, let's face it, we're a research institution. All of us take teaching very seriously, but equally, we take research very seriously. And we expect you guys to take research seriously as well, and we'll involve you in our research, and we'll encourage you to embark on research of your own. Many of my students have published their class essays for me, and some of them published the essays as an edited volume on European responses to the economic crisis. And the volume had quite a good success in Europe. So I think that this problem-centered research aspect is something that extends throughout the community and forms the community. Now, having said that, what do we do with this problem-centered research? Well, the what part is actually very flexible. Obviously, we have a lot of area studies programs, and area studies programs sound relatively vague. Oh, I'm going to go study something about Europe. But what it means is we address real problems as they arise in Europe. They could be problems related to European security. What is NATO doing? Who is NATO anyway? I mean, what is NATO doing in Libya, for example? They could be problems in migration. How is Europe going to respond to the wave of people trying to flee North Africa? They could be problems in European economics. Why did Portugal have to seek assistance from its European Union partners in solving its fiscal situation? Now, all of these different problems are located in Europe, which is why it's a European studies program. But the problems could be located elsewhere as well. And we can be very flexible in addressing that. Just a couple of years ago, we decided we didn't have enough courses in conflict management. We talked to one of our supporters who agreed to help us to expand our offer there in Bologna. And we grew the program quite dramatically with the aid of our colleagues here in Washington to cover a whole range of issues about conflict. We did the same thing with the Middle East. As we looked at the Middle East, we noticed that many of our students were expressing interest in learning Arabic. So we laid on Arabic instruction at the Bologna Center. We added on courses to cover Middle Eastern politics. And lo and behold, it's now one of the most attractive areas of work at the Bologna Center, not just among Middle Eastern studies concentrators, but obviously among people who study all different kinds of things, from conflict management to international law to human rights. All these things have a relevance to the Middle East that we can now address. Final illustration. One of our advisory board members came up to us and said, you know what, I wonder what you guys are doing to help students better to understand how to assess risk and uncertainty in complex decisions. And we said, well, that's an interesting question that you're asking. Why don't you work with us and we'll come up with a program? And so we're laying on a new course next year that will explore precisely that, drawing advice from my colleague here, Charles Duran, who was one of the first people to actually create a mathematical model for assessing political risk in the 1970s. We're going to go back over that ground and see how we can deal with risk and uncertainty in a much more complicated global environment. So the what we do is very flexible. It's the how we do that matters. And then that leaves the who. Well, the who, on a student side, you have to understand you guys are going to learn so much more from each other than we could ever possibly teach you just through your day-to-day interaction. On Monday, I was sitting in a conference that we had where we had involved some students in work studying the role of electoral management boards. And two of the students presented the case of electoral management boards in South Ossetia and the relationship between electoral management in South Ossetia and electoral management in Georgia. Now, it helped that one of the students was from South Ossetia and the other student was from Georgia. So we had a good sense of what was really going on. And when you think about the fact that there are only 45,000 South Ossetians, right? Her absence from the country is remarked upon. So your ability to learn from one another in that context is pretty dramatic. I was trying to interview a student we interview all of the students that are admitted directly to the Bologna Center. I was trying to interview this student from Japan, and I couldn't get the phone call to go through, and he sent me a very apologetic email. And I was actually getting quite irritated until I realized that the country had just suffered this devastating earthquake, which is why the phones weren't working. And in my subsequent conversations with him, I learned, to my horror, the situation firsthand as it had unfolded in that country. And I was able to touch base with former students who were scattered across Japan right now, trying to make sense of what had happened to them and how best to proceed forward. So a lot of it is learning from one another about the good things, but it's also learning from one another about the bad things as well. And then, of course, there's the faculty, and this is where I'll finish with. There are many international relations programs at many prestigious universities, and the international relations programs, in order to achieve this interdisciplinary mix, will often bring the best faculty together that their university has to offer. And I salute them. That's quite impressive. We bring the best faculty together that Europe has to offer. I fly in the top faculty members from every major city in Europe to teach our students. And in doing so, we not only give the students the opportunity to experience the wide diversity of opinions that Director Keller talked about before, but also to get plugged into different national networks in Germany, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Norway, Denmark, the United Kingdom, Spain. And so in that sense, you have the opportunity to make connections through your fellow classmates, but also to make connections through your teachers and professors, so that you can explore an international career that's truly international and not national, looking at the outside world through a single lens. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric. Dorothy.
Well, excuse me. Welcome, everybody. I'd like to add my congratulations to those of my colleagues here and say how terrific it is that you've been accepted here. We hope you really think very carefully about coming here. It really is a wonderful place. And let me tell you first a little bit about the emerging market specialization, because many of you probably are interested in that. And I want to make very clear, the emerging market specialization is not a concentration. You have concentrations in all the regional areas of the world. You also have wonderful functional programs here. And the point of the emerging market specialization, if you will, is a bit of an add-on. It is meant to recognize the changed nature of the world, the importance of emerging markets in the world economy and political system. We put the program in place about 10 years ago, and the idea is also to allow you, if you will, if you are regional concentrators, to get out of your region a little bit by taking 2 classes outside your regional concentration in another regional area. And in meeting your economics requirements, you will have electives in economics as well as required courses. And 2 of your economic electives must deal with emerging markets in order to meet the requirements. Now, why do this? I think there are also a couple of other reasons. For many financial institutions, for those of you who are potentially pursuing careers in the broader financial community, whether IMF, World Bank, the Federal Reserve, there's no question that emerging markets is often its own department. For many in the financial markets, emerging markets is an asset class. So that's part of the rationale that lies behind the introduction of this program. For those of you who do joint degrees, it's a little bit tougher to meet the requirements for a specialization, but not impossible. In any case, you have to plan all of you would not believe how quickly your time goes here. And you do have just 16 courses, and when you want to be very focused in terms of if you do know where you're headed professionally, then you have to really be very focused in planning your courses over the time that you're here, which is just really, the 2 years goes really fast. I want to mention something else that Professor Bodner said to pick up on. I've had a number of students in class who never thought they wanted to do economics, and then who find that their experience here is so rewarding, and they are so excited by the prospects of career opportunities that they hadn't even begun to consider just because they had the economics background. No, I'm really serious. I had dinner the other night with a former student who's now working at the IMF who said exactly that. He was a history major. He's a Latin American person. He never even thought of economics and was so excited that he had the opportunity to both be here and have the kind of training that Professor Bodner is talking about, yet the very applied part of it that has allowed him to, and he's now going to go on and do a business degree. So for many of you who don't think you like it, you might find yourself quite surprised after being here. Any case, I want to also mention two other things about the school that I particularly like and admire. One of the things has to do with the faculty. A number of us have already spoken of the faculty, and in some sense, I guess I represent the applied person, the adjunct person, the person who spent a good part of her career outside of an academic institution. I've now been at SAIS for 13 years. This is my 13th year here, and I can't tell you what a joy it has been to be here. I think that one of the most amazing things about this faculty is you have these world-class, truly world-class professors, tenured professors, who really form the core of the faculty and who are doing research and writing and advising, and they are the, if you will, at least my way of thinking, they are the heart and soul of this institution. And also the junior professors who are also doing cutting-edge research. And then you have a large core of people, among whom I would count myself, who have had very active careers outside of SAIS, but who then come to SAIS and are able to, if you will, somewhat apply the experiences that we've had elsewhere to our teaching. And I think it brings an incredible richness to the academic experience here at SAIS. Everybody has spoken to that, but I actually have lived it, and I can't tell you it's been marvelous for me, and I'm sure many of my colleagues who are teaching here who have done other things elsewhere feel exactly as I do. And then lastly, of course, it's you guys. You guys really do form, really, you are the heart of the school. I mean, it is truly one of the most enormous pleasures to sit in a classroom with you and talk with you. You all have done so many interesting things in the time that, even just before you've come here, not only that you've come from different places, but what you've done before you've come here. All of you, I assume, or virtually all of you, have had some kind of other experience, usually foreign, but working in the international area. And in terms of class discussions and sharing of ideas with each other, I really echo what Professor Jones has said. You guys will probably learn much more from each other and hanging out than you will possibly learn from us, but we'll try anyway. So welcome, and I'm available if you have any other questions. You're welcome to email me about anything that has to do with the emerging markets area. But I know you're going to have a wonderful day ahead of you, and I hope that your final decision brings you here and maybe even into my class. Thank you.
Ken.
Thank you, Mike. I was struck, Mike, by your saying that you're in your second career. As you mature and have a chance to try some other careers, you may begin to catch up with some of us. There are some people who ask how, as a person who got a PhD in chemical engineering, I wound up doing this kind of work. It seems a perfectly natural way to go from my perspective. But I think that issue of career development, the comment that Dean Einhorn made and that Dean Lampton has made is very important. I don't think any of us have ever known more than 5 years in advance what we would be doing. And I think that doesn't mean you don't prepare for the next decision you have to make, but don't expect that you'll know anything much beyond the first or second bifurcation in those decisions. And I think it's worth my trying to give you an idea, since Eric has mentioned several of the things I would otherwise have mentioned. I'll take him to task afterward. But let me talk a little about the field that I wind up in, because it's an interesting aspect of what I think is an important lesson for those of us working in a multidisciplinary area. There is a cliche: we live in a technological age, and some of us have been called upon occasionally to try to figure out what does that actually mean. Can you operationalize that or make some sense out of what it means? And actually in 1989, I think it was, I was called by the council, some people at the Council on Foreign Relations who reported that their board of directors had come to the conclusion that science and technology were having some influence on international affairs. And they wondered whether I could affirm that that was the case, and if so, tell them what to do about it, which got me much involved in trying to think about how to think about the interactions between science and technology and international affairs. We all knew even then that energy and the environment were very important areas. Information technology was developing rapidly. When we talked about development, as Sinman will talk about in a minute, we knew technology transfer would come into play. There were deep, deep value questions associated with genetic engineering and recombinant DNA technologies, and regulatory risk involved in certain health measures. The question was, how could you begin to integrate and think about those things together? What happens when the worlds of science and technology intersect with the worlds of international affairs? How do you decide whether there is scientific consensus on global warming? How do you decide whether or not a genetic modification is a safe one? So that there are issues in that respect of understanding in the political framework something which comes out of a scientific framework. There were also questions of how you guide technological development. How do you decide what the best way is to stimulate technological development? Is it merely, I shouldn't say merely, is it an input in an economic model? Or is it something, we have lots of inside jokes. I have many friends who are economists, or who have friends who are economists. So, but is it merely an input, or does one have to think more about the nature of it? What about the fact that we think of science as an internationally cooperative enterprise, but ultimately it comes down to business innovation, which is an internationally competitive enterprise? How do you go through the transition from one to the other of those areas? And all of that became the basis for trying to rethink a context for international affairs where science and technology are involved. And it became clear that it had to be bidirectional. There were ways in which science and technology changed other choices. When we had satellites which could take pictures of what was happening on the Earth, we could confidently enter into a reduction of forces in Europe because we knew if people were approaching the Fulda Gap to do something. We could enforce, we could corroborate what was happening. So science and technology were enabling diplomatic choices that were outside of the realm of science and technology itself. On the other hand, it was constraining choices. I remember an incident when I was president of the University of Minnesota in which we were worried about losing technological leadership. And the then Secretary of Commerce wrote to the presidents of American universities saying that from that moment on, because of the worry about losing ideas, if any of our faculty members gave talks at international conferences, they would need an export license. That disappeared quickly because, of course, it was not possible in the technological age to do something like that. There were things that were constraints on what was possible, and there were new ideas. How do you deal with patenting a life form? Harvard patented a mouse. How do you deal with a question like that? Out of all of that came our view that in order to understand this, in order to provide a context for studying energy or environment, in order to study information technology and how that makes us think more about what privacy means, what hate speech means, what freedom of information means. All of those became ways of looking at how science and technology didn't have first-order effects, but second and third-order effects on society. And in the other direction, how you could encourage or discourage the wrong developments of technology, and how do you control them. What's the story about? It's about the fact that one of the things we need to do is develop contexts for viewing things in the international arena, for finding out ways of thinking about it which will have manifestations in particular areas, but which will be broader than those areas. And those kinds of contextual ideas are some of the things that Eric referred to in the Bologna Center in the risk course, where you now are using risk as a context for looking at a number of issues. In ethnic conflict, we're using ethnic conflict and trying to decide how it plays out. And so one of the things that's wonderful about SAIS, and has been a very happy experience for me in Bologna, is that ability to experiment, is that ability to, because there are no disciplinary boundaries, reconceptualize how to think about a set of issues that require that you think about them from all of those perspectives. Introduce short courses which would deal with a particular idea. For example, Gary Sick from SIPA gives a one-month course on Iran every fall at the center. In order to introduce something, you want to be flexible, and we've had that flexibility. Part because we're small. You want to be open to ideas. You don't want to be constrained by your own boundaries. And let me add what others have said here. When I first came to SAIS Bologna in 2003 on sabbatical from another university, what struck me were the students. And it struck me not only that in a classroom where there might be people from 20 or 25 different countries, that they were willing to debate in that class, and that mirabile dictu, they did the readings. I always consider that a great gain, that they actually came prepared to duke it out, and there's nothing more pleasant than duking it out with people who've done the readings. Thank you.
Thank you. Cinnamon.
All right, thank you. Welcome. And I would just say I'm a SAIS grad, and I found myself, many years ago, I'm not going to tell you exactly how many, but I found myself in the same situation that you find yourself in today. So I wish you very, very good decision making. I would also like to applaud Professor Lampton in choosing the order in which we speak. We started with strategic studies, and we hear about Professor Cohen going out and bombing things from helicopters, and somebody's got to clean it up. So international development comes to the rescue. So with whatever is left. And I was also struck, a number of us. Professor Lampton also said, SAIS is really good because it prepares us for more than one career, and I think this is my third career. And so I'm exhibit, whatever that would be, A, on the panel of yet another faculty member who has had 3 careers. I spent 20 years in the nonprofit sector, and I spent 10 years in international banking and finance. And so the courses that I teach here at SAIS for the International Development Program basically reflect that background that I have. And where but SAIS could you teach a course on management principles of international development non-governmental organizations, what a mouthful, and assessing the international financial institutions, past, present, and future. As one of my colleagues said, the iffies are the iffies iffy. So I really like that. So the other thing, Professor Cohen made a very good point in talking about the fact that SAIS has no respect for disciplines. In other words, that we really collaborate together. We worked with strategic studies when I first joined the faculty at SAIS in putting together a disaster relief simulation. Again, after a natural disaster, the military has the infrastructure and the experience and the on-the-ground ability to deliver very quickly. But then after that, you begin to really think about not just medicines and food and restoring security, but actually putting in place institutions, rebuilding schools, rebuilding hospitals, rebuilding infrastructure, and that's the role of international development. Also, in our approach to international development, we take an interdisciplinary approach. This is not unique. I think all of us at SAIS have an interdisciplinary approach to the way we approach our subject matter. So in our international development program, we have a politics and governance track. We have a finance and development track that Professor Sobel and I anchor. And then we also have a human development track. So we take a look at follow the money. We also, and this is grounded in our very strong core of international economics. We also take a look at if you ignore politics, this will be at your risk of understanding the outcome of a particular development problem. So if you don't take a political economic analysis of a problem, you will really not understand it deeply. And then, like many other of our colleagues here at SAIS, we provide practical coursework in human development. So how do some of these global problems play out in a particular social sector? And we're quite deep in global health and foreign policy, but increasingly in education, in agriculture and rural development, and other of the social sectors. The other thing, who was it that said location, location, location? Everybody. This is Think Tank Row. So if you look to my right, you've got the Carnegie Endowment, you've got the Center for Global Development, you've got the Brookings Institution, you've got the Peterson Institute. This is the center of thinking about development. Also, if you think about, is Washington, D.C. really the home of development? My former colleague, Francis Fukuyama, and I debated about this, but I actually agree with his assessment. This is really the center of the international development world. You've got the World Bank, you've got the Inter-American Development Bank, you've got the the IMF. You've got all of the countries' embassies based here. And so it is really an interdisciplinary, inter-organizational place for you to pursue the study of international development. So I really commend it to you. I was thinking just our speaker series, all of us have high-level speaker series. Professor Cohen talked about having, Mike Mullen here. Next week we're having through the Development Roundtable, which is the International Development Program's high-level speaker series, Ambassador Ron Kirk, the U.S. Trade Representative, and he's going to be talking with us about key issues in international trade and the U.S. perspective. And then the week after that, Francis Fukuyama is coming here for a book launch to talk about the origins of political thought. Really very, very interesting. So I'd like to conclude my remarks just saying, it's hard to go last, but just to reinforce the message, the SAIS networks are world-class. And so I often myself find when we were in Beijing this past January doing a joint intercession trip with China Studies colleagues looking at poverty reduction and sustainable development, we had our first evening was a get-together with SAIS alums doing really, really interesting things, one of whom was pursuing HIV/AIDS and how the Chinese government was approaching that problem. Another was involved in banking and finance. Another was involved in housing and urban development. And these were issues that all of our students were interested in. That is mirrored, so the alumni network is very much mirrored in the classroom. And I'm just going to close by saying that the greatest strength of SAIS is you and the experiences that you bring to our classrooms after you do the reading so that you can engage and duke it out with us. But your field experience and your prior experience really deepens and enriches all the classes that we have here at SAIS and indeed everything that we do. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and I want to thank my colleagues for both inspiration and perspiration and for being brief. I just wanted to add a couple of things there. Working off synonyms is the SAIS network, and you mentioned China. And I still sort of have emblazoned in my brain, I was in Beijing going to the August 1st, which is the building, is the National Defense Ministry. It had been built early in this millennium. I don't know how many mountains of marble gave their life to build that building, but it's this enormous cavernous thing, and you drive up, there's a guard there to salute you. But the young man who came out to escort me to see the Deputy Chief of Staff for Intelligence was a young man, and he snapped on a salute and said, "Welcome to the Ministry of National Defense. I'm a SAIS graduate." So that was the last place I actually expected that treatment. One other thing I would say is not only are the students the best thing about SAIS, perhaps, but I think it's fair to say the faculty like each other. And that's not always the case, I should say. So we're a collegial group. We want to learn together, and now we welcome your questions. We have quite a bit of time, at least 20 minutes, and probably there's some wiggle room if there's popular demand. Yes, and I'll try to move my choice around, but I'll start with the woman in the front here.
My name is Helen, and I'm from New York City.
Well, I guess we better wait because there are people way back.
Thanks. Okay. I'm Tawan. I'm from New York City, and I'm admitted to the International Development Program.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So I'm interested in working for the UN down the road, not right after SAIS, but eventually down the road. And I know that we have a very strong international development program, but I noticed that not that many students from SAIS go into the UN. So my question is, firstly, what kind of opportunities and resources are there for students who are interested in the UN work? And secondly, is there a strong network within the UN, a strong SAIS alumni network within the UN?
Okay, well, thank you for asking that question. Just yesterday, and I mean, I was talking with one of the students in our African Studies program who was about to fill in an online application for a job. He's about to graduate this May with the United Nations, and he was going to close himself into a room where you fill in the application for the next 3 hours. So I was advising him strategically about how to prepare himself to fill in this online application. So one of the things that you'll have is the faculty able to advise you about that kind of thing. So with my prior, one of the things, we can't mention everything that we've done in our life, but one of the things that I did before I came to SAIS was to work at the United Nations in Geneva. And I was chosen as the U.S. representative to serve in basically a student-led examination of then the topic at the United Nations, which was habitat, human settlements, which was a very interesting experience. So, and then also, although our networks are not as deep at the United Nations as they are at the World Bank, I mean, this is a kind of a open fact that's sort of known around the SAIS community. We have about 500 SAIS grads working in the World Bank group. Not all as staff. There are some of them short-term consultants, but so there's a very deep network at the World Bank. There's not as deep a network at the United Nations, but what we have is quality. And so it's just a matter of knowing which entity of the United Nations family you'd like to work with. And our program also has a memorandum of understanding with UN Women and also an ongoing relationship with UNICEF where we have summer internships for our IDEV students. And that's an exclusive relationship that I should say for the rest of you, that if IDEV students do not choose to accept those opportunities, then we open them up and share them with the rest of the school.
Well, thank you. Yes, sir. Or yes, ma'am, I'm sorry.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Nicolette Maunganit, and I've been admitted to the International Development Program.
Congratulations.
Thank you. The Bologna Center. And my question is with regards to student research, the feasibility of that given the time constraints of taking 16 courses within 2 years. How feasible is that, and how feasible is it to actually participate in meaningful research, and then also considering students who are going to start off in Italy and finish in DC, continuing that research?
You want to start? Yeah, sure. Obviously, the opportunities for doing research are probably a little bit easier in Bologna because there are opportunities for doing internships in Bologna are almost zero, right? So there are very few internship possibilities in Italy. So students have a lot of time to focus on their schoolwork, and they have a lot of time to focus on research. So I'll give you an illustration. The former Italian Prime Minister, a guy called Romano Prodi, who used to be the president of the European Commission, called me up and asked me if I would help him in organizing a conference on the future of Africa. And they wanted a briefing book for this conference. This was last year. They wanted a briefing book, and they weren't quite sure how we were going to put it together. So I organized a meeting and got about 50 student volunteers. We trained them how to write briefs modeled along the presidential daily briefs that are used in the White House. And within about 6 weeks, we were able to build a briefing book that was used at a high-level conference that included heads of state and government from across Africa and representatives from China, Europe, and the United States. And I thought that was kind of a meaningful experience. They seem to enjoy it, so they're actually going to do it again here in D.C. this year. The conference will be held in the middle of June, and then the last iteration of the conference will take place in Addis Ababa in 2012. So I think the opportunities are there. I'm not saying we're going to have a big conference like that every year, but we always have something going on.
I think in addition, all of the faculty have assigned to them resources for being able to hire research assistants to help in their own work. And another thing that may not come up in any other context is the students at the Bologna Center produce an annual journal, the BC Journal, which includes original work by the students as well as other contributions. It's an extremely professional set of papers that are produced at the end of the year, and we probably have copies of the journal here. I think we're in the 13th or 14th year of its production, but it's entirely student-produced, edited, paid for, not paid for, they raise money for it along the way. But it's actually an extremely good journal to which a number of faculty, both in Bologna and here in Washington, have contributed over the years.
And then I would just like to add that the International Development Program itself has a student-led publication known as SAIS Perspectives. The theme this year was power dynamics of development, and talk about the most timely theme. There's a picture of the Jasmine Revolution on the cover. So there's that opportunity. And then also in the 16 courses that you take at SAIS, one of them may be an independent study course. And so you may choose to start your research in Bologna and then continue it here in collaboration with one of the full-time faculty members.
Yeah, I think, from the point of view of faculty, you think a lot about what's the mix of assignments that you want to give students. And the upshot of that, I think, is that you really get a lot of variation. I know in my own teaching, I do have a seminar, which is a research seminar, where the students are producing a paper of publishable length and quality, and some of them actually have published their papers. You might have other courses where, among other things, you are trying to develop people's skills at things like memo writing or group work or briefing, what have you, where you'll have a different mix of assignments. I think that's actually a strength. The other point I would make is every program has a capstone requirement, which can be discharged in a number of ways. In most programs, I think it's fair to say, one of the ways of doing that is through a substantial research paper of some kind. To the question of time, people work very hard here, and that's really, I think, the expectation. It's, you've got 4 courses, language, some people may do occasionally internships or something on the side. So it is a very, very busy time that people have. At the end of the day, that's a very good thing. I was talking to one of my former students who actually just moved to the NSC. And but he had been in the Pentagon. He said, we were chatting. He said, I always like to hire former SAIS students. And I said, is that out of loyalty to your alma mater? He says, well, there may be a little of that. But I said, you know what the main thing they have going for them? He said, smart. There are a lot of smart people out there. These people really know how to work hard. And it's true. I mean, I think no student gets through here without feeling they've really been put through their paces, and that's the kind of experience that you should want.
I'd just say one last thing on the publication front and involving students. I remember about, it was 8 years ago, China was going to have a new leader about whom zero was known, basically, in the outside world. One of my students said, I'd like to do a biographic essay on him, and I encouraged, after I read it, I said, this is terrific. This is more than we know about him by orders of magnitude. What struck me 8 years later, this guy's been the head of China for 8 years and 2 more to go. It's still the most we know about this guy, and this is the classic article. So anyway, students do great work. I saw a hand and then it went down. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Maro. I've been accepted into the SAIS Bologna program, and my specialization would be strategic studies. My question is, I'm very interested in the nexus of security and development. So obviously I'm interested in 2 specializations. I'm also interested in multiple regions. So I'm wondering if there is any flexibility, any way to accommodate that. I have a couple of languages that I've been studying, and particularly French, Arabic, and Urdu. and then I'm interested in Africa and South Asia. So I'm wondering, is that at all possible to work
I guess
into?
I have a hunch that the best thing, well, first, welcome to SAIS and to Strategic Studies and Bologna. I've got a feeling that your best course of action may be to take 3 master's degrees at SAIS. It's only 6 years. It is it's a pretty structured program. And for a whole bunch of reasons, Strategic Studies doesn't do dual concentrations. That's partly because we do so many other things, and for which there are a limited number of slots, like this trip to Yuma we're about to take. But I think within the structure of the requirements, there is flexibility, and we're trying to build in. I'm chairman of the curriculum committee. We're trying to build in more flexibility over time. That said, you will leave SAIS with a list, all of you, with a list of at least a dozen courses that you wish you could have taken. Okay, that's just going to be the way it is. That's an indication that it's a first-rate place. Part of what you should take away from a SAIS education is the ability and a greater confidence in your ability to learn the things you want to learn after you leave the place. And part of our job is to give you the skills and the self-confidence to do that.
Could I add? I just wanted to add something about concentrations. Concentrations have a great value. They have a couple of great values. One is in indicating a cluster of courses that make some sense taken together. Another, particularly in the Washington experience, is it's a social grouping that puts you together with others. But the negative of it is that sometimes they may not be giving you exactly the set of courses you want, and you'd like a little flexibility around the edge. And you have some in the others. If you double concentrate, you add to that burden. So now you're trying to satisfy a kind of bureaucratic requirement rather than looking at a set of courses that interests you, that you can put together with the concentration, because you need the two, the international economics concentration and one other to graduate. But beyond that, use concentrations as a guide to interesting courses rather than allowing it to become a constraint on what it is you choose to do. And I think if you put that together, you come out ahead.
Dorothy?
I just wanted to add one thing. I was thinking you needed 10 years here, not 6. But anyway, I didn't mention one point on the emerging market specialization that your question raised. I certainly agree with Professor Keller in terms of what he said about you want to take courses that really matter to you. You obviously have to meet your concentration requirements, your economics requirements, and mostly what you should do would be taking courses that really interest you. But within all of that, you can do the emerging market specialization, even if you are a functional concentrator, if you have, of your 16 courses, at least 6 broadly relate to the emerging markets. They can't all be on the political side. They can't all be on the economic side. There has to be some blend. But I have a feeling you will find over the course of your time here that you may well find that you end up with 6 courses that do cover broadly different parts of the world. And by emerging markets, we have a very loose definition. It's basically non-OECD countries. So I have a feeling you could probably do that within with still meeting your requirements for the strategic studies concentration.
Eric?
Yeah, just real quickly about the Bologna Center. I mean, I mentioned that we had expanded our coverage of conflict management, and that's largely because a lot of students have expressed a similar interest to the one that you're mentioning. And just as a bit of advertisement, I mean, we have this guy, Francis Vendrell, who used to be the UN Special Envoy to Afghanistan, and he was the EU Special Envoy to Afghanistan after that. But he's done conflict management type activities all over the world, and he teaches a course for us in the spring semester. We have a guy, Richard Wilcox, who works for one of the UN agencies down in Rome, and he had been, we almost lost him because he had been appointed the UN's delegate to South Sudan. But then he came back, and so he's got a lot of experience like that. And we have a guy called Francesco Strazzari, who is obviously an Italian guy, and he does a lot of work trying to help developing countries manage organized crime and things related to that. And he teaches our Intro to Conflict Management course. And then the last guy we have is a guy called Vinmish Kuna, who's our German professor. And he set up the largest civilian peacekeeper training facility in Germany and ran that for many years and perfectly combines the kind of interest that you have in both strategic studies and conflict and development.
Eric, I just wondered if you wanted to clarify the phrase manage organized crime.
I was going to clarify that.
Obviously, you only do that for a fee.
Yeah. In the rear there? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Naomi Gingold. I'm in the DC program, and my concentration is Southeast Asian Studies. I have two kind of related questions. One is, I come from a media background, media politics background, and I'm looking to go back into, probably, at least for my first career, back into the media journalism world. And I wondered how much, I guess, space there was for that, or studies, or relation there was to that. And along with that, I wonder how much room there is for the soft IR subjects, like, for example, political anthropology, cultural studies, history, historical work that I think is very important to the study of IR, but often gets left out when you just look at rational actors and conflict management and that kind of thing.
Could you just restate just the very first part? I missed the first part.
The first part was just about media and journalism, and I wondered, do a lot of graduates go into that? That's something, that's my background, and that's something that I'm looking to go back into, at least for my first part of post-grad life.
You know,
So-
I don't know who up here may want to answer that, but Nelson Graves, who's our director of admissions, has just come from serving as manager of Reuters in Asia, and he might be able to tell you something on that.
Thank you, Ken. Something that was said earlier resonated with me, and that was that what one can learn here at SAIS can be very helpful in choosing a career that one might not otherwise choose. And in my case, I went to SAIS quite a while ago, but even then, in fact, from the beginning of SAIS, economics was a requirement, and I'd had very little, if any, economics beforehand, and it was tremendously helpful in launching a foreign correspondence career, which I had. And there are many other SAIS graduates who've gone from SAIS either directly into media or journalism, or indirectly. So I have found myself that what I learned here certainly was very applicable to many of the questions that are addressed by the faculty on this panel and elsewhere in SAIS, but also by journalists who work around the world. Hope that's helpful.
We were just whispering about there's a program that was originally funded by the Pew Foundation, which brings journalists, group of journalists to SAIS every year. And it's no longer funded by Pew, but it's still there. It's run by John Shidlovsky, who used to be at the Baltimore Sun. There are a lot of former journalists here. A lot of people who go on to journalism. I guess, though, I would say I think this is an issue the faculty always wrestles with. On the one hand, we do very much want to be relevant to your next careers, and that's why we have the skills courses. That's why even within our own teaching, we will do things that'll help make you better at that, including just giving you opportunities for short public speaking opportunities, or learning how to write a memo and all that sort of thing. But I think we also feel that the core activity here has to really be academic and serious, and not simply targeted at preparing you for the next step. We're more interested in where you're going to be 10 years from now than where you're going to be the year after you graduate. So, I mean, I think it is a good preparation for going back into that world. It's a good preparation for all kinds of things. By the way, one other thing I should say, I don't know whether there was much discussion with you folks of the mid-career program. You're all, I assume, most of you are here from the MA program. We have a one-year mid-career program, which tends to be folks who are a bit older, and the great thing about that is many of those people are from the world of journalism. They're in the same classes as the MA students, and they're mixing with them. And from a career point of view, I think that really is a wonderful, wonderful thing. Strategic Studies is actually not a separate department. We're part of a broader international relations department, which includes things like conflict management and international law and global theory and history and energy and resources and environment. So there's really quite an array of courses. As I said, SAIS, I said SAIS doesn't respect disciplinary boundaries. Another way of saying that is we're multidisciplinary. So even in my own program, I have a PhD anthropologist, David Kilcullen, somewhat famous guy in the counterinsurgency world, teaching a course which is very largely about anthropology. And in fact, I have another course taught by another full-blown anthropologist called Anthropology for Strategists. So yeah, I think you'll find no matter what the program is, you're going to get people from a wide range of disciplinary backgrounds and a wide range of approaches to the same core issues.
I might just say on that, emblematic of this concentrations and departments and programs not having one discipline. I'm a political scientist, but I have as a colleague, as a full-time faculty member, an economist, and he teaches courses on the economy of China. And he was representative of the World Bank in China for 5 years. Before that, he was in Africa and Indonesia. So he straddles the economics, area studies, and development areas. I have another woman who's tremendous. She denominates the books she sells in the tens to 100,000 denomination, whereas a lot of us would have smaller denominations in the sales of our books. She wrote The Private Life of Chairman Mao. She's really more an anthropologist than anything else. So just in my department, you have, I think, a broad array. And I think that's what makes it so exciting for faculty to talk to people that have a different take or a different perspective, different level of the system. And hopefully that's what makes it interesting to all of you. Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Vanya Dimova. I was admitted to the DC campus in international development. I have a question about the future career path. Given the fact that I come from a business school background and working on Wall Street for a long time, and I want to preface this with the fact that I'm very excited about the economics curriculum. How will the SAIS program prepare people with similar background transition from finance to international development, economic development, where the crossroad between political science and finance meet, given the fact that I haven't taken a single political science course in my life. So how will the curriculum assist that? And is there any process in place or a certain program to where faculty guides the student to find the best fit career-wise?
Yes, very much so. And I was just going to say welcome again to SAIS, because you'll have an opportunity not just to take your first political science class, but a number of them. And so on top of your very important economics core curriculum, which is important for all SAIS students. To answer your question, yes, each student at SAIS, including each student in the International Development Program, is assigned a faculty advisor. And if you choose the finance and development track, that would either be Professor Sobel or me, and we would work with you to hear what your specific career goals are and to then guide you. One very tried and true path for students that have preceded you is that they take hardcore business skills from Wall Street and then apply them in the microfinance or the small and medium scale enterprise sector and get involved in something called impact investing, where you can do well financially, but also do good in terms of really addressing problems at the grassroots with people at marginal levels of existence through increasing the impact of investing, either scaling up a very small business or hooking into global networks for marketing. And so that's just one of many different career paths that would be open to a person like you.
Gordon?
I'd just like to add, in the finance course offerings we have, I mean, since we are an international economics program, we focus really only on international finance, and in that arena we don't attempt to compete with the large-scale business schools on what I call East-West finance, London, New York, Tokyo. Most of our course work in finance tends to look at what you would crudely call North-South finance, which is financing things in developing and emerging economies. So most of the attention and most of the case studies and things we do, even in the finance courses, tends to be dealing with issues about financing in emerging markets. My colleague Roger Leeds teaches a course on private equity, that it's entirely about private equity in emerging markets. So again, getting to this, how do you promote small and medium enterprise activity? You got the microcredit, you got small enterprise. How does the financial sector do its thing to try to help promote improving economic conditions in developing countries? So. And that generally is new material that a lot of people have not necessarily seen if they've done a business school background, where you don't generally have specific finance courses on emerging markets. So you can bring, and we appreciate people coming in with backgrounds like that, and you'll find that even with that background, there are courses in the international finance offerings that we have that will help you along with the International Development Program, develop and refine skills you need for careers in that area.
We'll just go to Elliot and then Eric on that question. Then I'll take the hand in the most rear part of the building, and then I guess we have to. Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me try a broader answer, and it really gets to what is a SAIS education all about. And my take on a SAIS education is a liberal arts education in international affairs. In this sense, we are very different from law schools or business schools. We're not trying to create a bunch of experts in a whole bunch of little fields and then vector them into slots there. We are trying to do something different, which is to give you a broad and deep education in thinking about the world from a number of different perspectives, acquiring a wide range of skills, because if there's one thing we know, it is that you'll find yourself in an environment for which you are not prepared in that narrow sense. And what a liberal arts education does, and that's why I quite passionately believe in it, is it prepares you for that. That's what it's supposed to do. It's not supposed to prepare you for anything in particular. It's supposed to prepare you for a wide range of challenges. I have students who are not in anything that has to do with the military world, but they have learned how to think about organizations. They've learned how to think about technology and how technology affects organizations. They most certainly have learned to think about leadership and what does it take to make organizations effective. And they apply those frameworks and take the skills that they've acquired, and they succeed in the workplace, including on Wall Street. And the last point I'd make is there is a synthesis that goes on in your heads, which is actually much more impressive than what happens among the faculty. We tend to be specialists. So I do military stuff, whether it's military history or watching the Marines blow stuff up. But what my students come out with is they come out with that, but they also come out with international relations theory, and they also come out with a lot of economics, and they also come out with a lot of foreign language expertise, and a whole bunch of other things, plus a wide range of experiences with other students, and they put all that together. And that is why I think SAIS students really do go on to do these amazing things once they leave this place.
Yeah, I actually teach the Introduction to Comparative Politics class that's required of all Introduction to Development or International Development students. And so rather than tell you a big story, I'll tell you a small story. I got contacted by one of my former students from that class, and she had a couple of questions for me about party system organization, electoral system design. And the reason was that she was working in private equity in Tunis, but when the government fell, her private equity firm seconded her to the Ministry of the Treasury, where she's now working. And she decided that she would work with some of her colleagues to build a political party, and they were going to build a political party to influence the design of the country's constitution. But in order to do that, they had to design an electoral system to select the people that would participate in the Constitutional Convention. And so she emailed me to say that she didn't really remember that part of the lecture. And so we've been working through these issues once again, and I'm happy to say that I think they've just about figured out what kind of electoral system they want, and so they've shifted on to look at party organization and communication strategy.
I promised the lady in the extreme rear there, last question, and maybe just one of my colleagues will field it, and then if it's inadequate, come up and we'll try to address it further.
It's not on.
Somehow it's not on.
Okay, I can just speak up. My name is Lynn, and I was admitted to the International Development Program at UC Campus. And I work primarily in Latin America and nonprofit work. Okay. Did you guys hear that, or should I start over? Okay. And what I was curious about is that I understand that the SAIS network, is pretty far-reaching in places like China, and then also in Asia, and then also in Europe. But I was curious about the reach of the alumni network in kind of more grassroots nonprofit organizations, specifically in Latin America.
Well, thank you for that question. It is, again, very deep. Again, it's really hard in the space of 10 minutes to say everything, but you'll be coming to our international development briefing at lunchtime. But briefly for everybody else, next year we will take an intersession trip. This past year it's been to China. Next year we're going to Colombia to look at the transformation of Medellin is basically the core of that trip, but also looking comparatively at other settings and issues in the Colombian context. You will again meet with SAIS alumni in the capital, but also as you go out into the countryside and to talk with them about their experiences. In terms of nonprofit organizations, the profile of employment after graduation for SAIS and SAIS as a whole and the International Development Program in particular is directly opposite. The majority of our grads go into, SAIS IDEV grads, go into nonprofit organizations, whereas you'll see that there's a higher percentage of SAIS grads overall who go into the private sector. So I would say it's very deep, and specifically in Latin America, you would have the opportunity after you apply and then are accepted to go on the intercession trip next January.
I would say just we're lucky that Professor Reardon Ruad isn't here. He heads the Latin America program. If he were here, he'd give a very extended answer to that. It's one of our biggest programs, most successful. He's really an entrepreneur, cares about his students, really follows them throughout their career. So I think you've got a lot of resource that maybe not reflected in this, what you've heard thus far. But anyway, thank you for all being here. We wish you the best, and have some coffee.